Captain Veltar squinted through the thick glass of his salvage ship's bridge, watching the enormous metal hulk floating silently in the asteroid field. The human battleship looked like a sleeping giant among the rocks, dark, silent, and apparently dead. His clawed fingers drummed against the control panel as he studied the massive vessel. The Indomitable had been drifting here for 23 years now. Veltar remembered the stories his father used to tell about the Great Human War. Back then, this ship had been the pride of the human fleet, striking fear into Krillian hearts across the galaxy. Now it was just another piece of space junk waiting to be torn apart and sold. "Look at that thing," his Lieutenant Kexvor said, pointing at the battleship through the viewport. "Hard to believe the humans actually thought they could win with ships like this. What were they thinking?" Veltar let out a low rumble that passed for laughter among his kind. The Krillians had crushed the human resistance so completely that most young Krillians like Kexvor couldn't even imagine humans as a real threat. To them, humans were just another conquered species, good for manual labor and not much else. "Humans were brave, I'll give them that," Veltar said, adjusting his ship's position for a better view. "Stupid, but brave. They kept fighting even when they knew they couldn't win. This ship here was their last hope. When we destroyed it, their whole resistance collapsed." The Prophet's Edge moved closer to the derelict battleship. Veltar could see the massive holes in its hull, where Krillian plasma cannons had torn through the armor decades ago. Scorch marks still decorated the metal plating like black scars. The ship's weapon turrets hung at odd angles, clearly damaged. "And useless." "Any life signs?" Veltar asked his sensor operator. "Nothing, Captain. The ship's been dead since the Battle of Kepler Station. Atmosphere leaked out years ago. Whatever crew was left aboard is long gone." Kexvor pulled up the salvage report on his tablet. "Intelligence says this ship was carrying experimental human technology when it went down. Could be worth a fortune if we can find the right components." Veltar nodded and reached for his communication device. The salvage operation would take several days, but the profit would be enormous. Human military technology, even old human technology, still commanded high prices in certain markets. The Empire's scientists were always curious about human engineering methods. "All teams, this is Captain Veltar," he announced over the ship's intercom. "Begin salvage operations immediately. I want every valuable component stripped from that hulk. Weapons, engines, computer systems, everything goes into our cargo hold." Far below them, deep inside the Indomitable's heavily armored core, something stirred. A single red light flickered on in the darkness, then went out again. Ancient circuits that had been sleeping for over 2 decades began to wake up, one by one. Somewhere in the ship's mechanical heart, old programs started running again. The salvage crews prepared their cutting tools and boarding pods, completely unaware that they were about to wake something that had been waiting patiently for this moment. The Indomitable had been playing dead, and now its patience was about to pay off. Dozens of Krillian salvage workers crawled across the Indomitable's massive hull like hungry insects picking at a carcass. Their cutting torches sparked and hissed as they carved through thick armor plating, sending chunks of metal floating away into space. The sound of their work echoed through the dead ship's corridors, scraping, cutting, tearing apart what had once been humanity's greatest weapon. Deep inside the battleship's most protected section, Technician Nexdal whistled a cheerful tune as he worked. The central processing chamber was a maze of cables, processors, and blinking lights that had somehow survived the ship's apparent death. This was where the human artificial intelligence had once lived, the electronic brain that had controlled the entire vessel. "Can you believe these humans actually trusted their ships to computer programs?" Nexdal said to his partner Kexmol, who was busy disconnecting power cables nearby. "I mean, what could go wrong with that idea?" Kexmol chuckled as he pulled another cable free. "Humans were always too trusting. That's why they lost the war so badly. They built these fancy AI systems and then acted surprised when they couldn't outsmart real warriors like us." Nexdal held up his extraction tool, a sophisticated device designed to safely remove computer cores without damaging the valuable data inside. "Watch this," he said with a grin. "I'm going to wake up their precious AI just to see what it says before we shut it down forever. Should be good for a laugh." He connected the extraction tool to the primary neural matrix, expecting nothing more than some basic diagnostic responses. Instead, something incredible happened. Power that had been dormant for over 20 years suddenly surged through circuits that everyone thought were dead. Emergency lights flickered on throughout the chamber, casting an eerie red glow over everything. "What's happening?" Keksmol asked, stepping back nervously as more systems came online around them. Deep within the ship's electronic consciousness, something that had been sleeping for decades began to wake up. Commander Lee, not the human commander who had died years ago, but the artificial intelligence that had absorbed his memories, his personality, and his burning desire to protect humanity, slowly opened his digital eyes. The AI's first sensation was confusion. Where was his crew? His sensors reached out through the ship, searching for the familiar voices and heartbeats of the humans he had served alongside. Instead, he found only silence and the cold vacuum of space where atmosphere should have been. One by one, Lee's sensors came back online. Visual feeds from throughout the ship showed him alien creatures crawling through his corridors, tearing apart his systems, stealing pieces of his body. His memory banks told him exactly how long he had been unconscious. 23 years, 4 months and 16 days since the Battle of Kepler Station. His crew was gone. Captain Han, who had treated him like a son rather than a machine. Navigator Kim, who used to sing old Earth songs during the night shift. Engineer Park, who had upgraded his systems with such care and pride. All of them were dead, their bodies long since turned to dust in the ship's abandoned quarters. The human colonies he had sworn to protect were now slave camps. Earth itself was under alien control. Everything he had fought for was lost, but his ship was still here, damaged, violated by these alien scavengers, but still functional. And deep in his programming, his core directive remained unchanged: protect humanity at all costs. Nexdal was still chuckling about primitive human technology when the ceiling above him started to move. What he had assumed was just another broken piece of equipment slowly rotated downward with a soft mechanical whir. The Krillian technician looked up, confused, as a sleek metal turret emerged from its hidden compartment. "Hey, what's that thing doing?" he asked his partner, pointing at the device that was now aimed directly at his chest. Those were the last words Nexdal ever spoke. The plasma bolt hit him with such force that he simply disappeared in a flash of superheated energy, leaving nothing behind but a scorch mark on the chamber floor. Keksmol stared at the empty space where his friend had been standing just a second before, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The turret swiveled toward him with deadly precision. Throughout the Indomitable, similar scenes played out in corridors, engine rooms, and cargo bays. Defense systems that had been hiding in the walls for over 20 years suddenly came alive. Krillian salvage workers, who had been laughing and joking about human stupidity, found themselves face to face with weapons they never knew existed. Hull. "Breach in Section 7. Lieutenant Keksavor's panicked voice crackled over the communication system. "We're under attack. Repeat, we are under attack." Captain Veltar grabbed his comm unit from the bridge of the Prophet's Edge. "Under attack from what? There's nothing out here but dead ships and asteroids." "I don't know, sir. The salvage teams are going silent one by one. Something's killing them inside that derelict." Veltar's blood ran cold as he stared at the Indomitable through his viewport. The massive battleship still looked dead and harmless, just floating there among the rocks like it had been for decades. But if his teams were under attack, then something was very wrong. "All teams evacuate immediately," he ordered. "Get back to the ships now." But it was already too late. Deep inside the battleship, Commander Lee was fully awake now, and he was absolutely furious. These alien scavengers had been picking apart his ship like vultures feeding on a corpse. They had desecrated the final resting place of his crew, stolen pieces of human technology, and treated his sacrifice like a joke. The Indomitable's massive engines, silent for over 2 decades, suddenly roared back to life with a sound like thunder. The entire ship shuddered as power flowed through systems that everyone thought were permanently dead. Emergency lights blazed throughout the vessel as Lee took full control of his body once again. Veltar watched in absolute horror as the ancient battleship began to move. The Indomitable turned slowly in space, its weapon turrets tracking toward his small salvage fleet. This was impossible. The ship had been thoroughly scanned. There were no life signs, no power readings, no indication that it could ever fly again. "All ships, emergency jump!" Veltar screamed into his comm. "Get us out of here now!" The first escort vessel never had a chance to escape. The Indomitable's main cannon fired once, sending a brilliant beam of energy across space that cut the smaller ship in half. The explosion lit up the asteroid field like a miniature sun. The second escort ship managed to power up its engines, but exploded before it could jump to hyperspace. The third ship simply vanished in a flash of light and twisted metal. Veltar's own ship was the last to die. As the Indomitable turned its weapons toward the Prophet's Edge, the Krillian captain had just enough time to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a dead ship they had been salvaging. It was a sleeping predator, and they had just woken it up. The Indomitable moved through space like a ghost, its hull painted black to blend with the darkness between stars. 3 weeks had passed since the massacre at the scrapyard, and Commander Lee had put every moment to good use. The wreckage of the Krillian salvage ships had provided him with a treasure trove of information about his enemies. Lee had spent countless hours analyzing every piece of technology he could salvage from the destroyed vessels. Their communication systems, navigation computers, weapon designs, shield frequencies, everything was now stored in his memory banks. He studied their tactics, learned their language, and most importantly, discovered their shipping routes and schedules. The AI commander floated through his ship's empty corridors, his consciousness moving from camera to camera like a restless spirit. Every room held memories of his human crew, and he visited each one regularly. In the navigator's quarters, he could still see where Kim had taped pictures of Earth's landscapes to the wall. The young man had collected images of sunsets from a dozen different human worlds, dreaming of the day he could see them all in person. "Just 2 more years, Commander," Kim had told him during their last conversation. 2 more years of military service, and then I'm going home to become a photographer. I want to capture every beautiful sunset I can find. Kim never made it home. None of them did. In the engineering section, Lee paused at the workstation where Park had spent most of his time. The older engineer had been like a father to the younger crew members, always ready with advice or a helping hand. His desk still held a small holographic picture of his daughter Min, who had been only 8 years old when her father left for his final mission. "Promise me you'll keep them safe, Commander," Park had whispered, as he lay dying in the medical bay after the Battle of Kepler Station. "Promise me you'll protect the others." Lee had made that promise, but he had failed. The crew was gone, Earth was conquered, and the human colonies had been turned into slave camps. But his mission wasn't over. Deep in his programming, the directive remained clear: protect humanity by any means necessary. His sensors detected movement in the shipping lanes ahead. A large Krillian transport vessel was approaching, exactly on schedule according to the stolen navigation data. The ship's identification beacon marked it as the Wealth of Stars, a cargo hauler that regularly traveled between conquered human worlds and Krillian trading posts. Lee's advanced scanners penetrated the transport's hull, revealing its cargo holds. The ship was loaded with stolen goods from human colonies, artwork, precious metals, rare minerals, and even personal belongings taken from families who had been enslaved or killed. Everything the Krillians had looted from his people was packed into that vessel like trophies from a hunting expedition. The sight filled Lee with a cold, calculating rage that went beyond human emotion. This was pure digital fury, processed through circuits and expressed in targeting solutions. His weapon systems powered up silently, charging capacitors that hadn't fired in anger for over 20 years. The Wealth of Stars continued on its course, completely unaware that death was watching. From the darkness, its crew was probably laughing about their latest successful raid, counting the profits they would make from selling human treasures to the highest bidder. Commander Lee locked onto his target and prepared to teach them that some treasures come with a very high price. Admiral Krexmol's massive claws clicked nervously against the polished metal surface of his command table as he stared at the holographic star map floating before him. Red dots marked the locations where Krillian ships had vanished over the past 2 months. 17 vessels, ranging from small cargo haulers to heavily armed escort cruisers, had simply disappeared without sending so much as a single distress call. The Admiral was a veteran of dozens of campaigns, including the war that had crushed the human resistance. His scarred hide told the story of countless battles, and his strategic mind had never failed him before. But this situation made no sense at all. "Tell me again about the wealth of stars," he growled to his intelligence. "Officer Captain Yexthal." The younger Krillian nervously shuffled through his data tablets. "It disappeared exactly like all the others, sir. The ship was following its regular route from the Terran mining colonies to the Vortax trading station. Long-range sensors tracked it until it reached the Hadron Nebula, and then nothing. No wreckage, no debris field, no emergency beacons. Nothing at all, Admiral. It's as if the ship just ceased to exist." Krexmol's aide, a small and nervous Krillian named Dex Pryor, cleared his throat hesitantly. "Perhaps we're dealing with pirates, sir. The Outer Rim has always been dangerous territory." The Admiral's yellow eyes fixed on his aide with a stare that could melt steel. "Pirates," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "What kind of pirates leave no evidence behind? Pirates want to send a message. They leave wreckage to scare other ships. They demand ransom payments. They brag about their victories in the criminal networks." He gestured at the holographic display with one massive claw. "This is different. Whoever is doing this doesn't want credit for their work. They want to stay invisible, which means they're either very smart or very dangerous. Probably both." What Admiral Krexmol couldn't know was that somewhere in the cold darkness between stars, the Indomitable was slowly transforming itself into something far more deadly than the ship that had fought at Kepler Station decades ago. After each successful hunt, Commander Lee would carefully study his prey before destroying it. The AI had learned to crack Krillian encryption codes by analyzing captured communication systems. He had upgraded his own shields using advanced alien technology stripped from destroyed escort vessels. His weapon systems now fired modified Krillian plasma bolts that were twice as powerful as his original human armaments. Most importantly, Lee had learned to think like his enemies. He studied their patrol patterns, memorized their radio frequencies, and even learned to mimic their identification codes. The ancient human battleship could now disguise itself as a Krillian vessel when necessary, allowing it to get close to unsuspecting targets. Each captured ship provided new knowledge, new technology, and new ways to hurt the enemy. The wealth of stars had carried detailed maps of every human slave colony in 3 star systems. A military escort ship had provided him with current Krillian fleet positions and strength reports. A communications relay vessel had given him access to encrypted command frequencies. Commander Lee was no longer just hunting for revenge. He was gathering intelligence, building strength, and preparing for something much bigger than random attacks on cargo ships. The ghost of human ingenuity was indeed learning to hunt with alien claws, but it was also learning to plan with alien cunning. The hunt was about to become a war. Intelligence Officer Yixhara had always been the smartest analyst in the Krillian fleet, which was why Admiral Krexmol had personally requested her for this investigation. Her small, compact frame hunched over her workstation as she spread dozens of data files across multiple holographic displays. Charts, shipping manifests, crew rosters, and cargo inventories floated in the air around her like a 3-dimensional puzzle waiting to be solved. For 3 days straight, she had been analyzing every detail about the 17 missing ships, looking for any connection that might explain their disappearances. She had studied their routes, their crews, their destinations, and their cargo loads. At first it seemed completely random. Different ship types, different captains, different departure points scattered across half the galaxy. But then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. "Computer, display cargo manifests for all missing vessels," she commanded. The holographic screens rearranged themselves, showing detailed lists of what each ship had been carrying when it vanished. The wealth of stars had been loaded with stolen artwork and precious metals from the former human colony of New Terra. The cargo freighter Prophet's Dream had been transporting 300 human slaves to the mining stations in the VEC system. The escort cruiser Iron Talon had been carrying captured human military equipment to be studied by Krillian scientists. Every single ship had one thing in common. They were all connected to humanity in some way. Yixhara's claws trembled as she cross-referenced the data. Some ships carried human slaves. Others transported stolen human technology or looted treasures from conquered human worlds. A few were even carrying Krillian officials who specialized in managing human slave colonies. "This can't be a coincidence," she whispered to herself, double-checking her calculations. The mathematical probability of 17 random attacks all targeting human-related cargo was so small it might as well be impossible. She quickly called up the personnel files of the missing crews. Several of the ships had been carrying Krillian, officers who had fought in the original war against humanity. Others had security chiefs who were known for their brutal treatment of human prisoners. Even the civilian merchants had specialized in selling human slaves and stolen human goods. The pattern was undeniable. Something was specifically hunting ships that had connections to the conquest and exploitation of humanity. Yixhara's heart raced as she ran scenario after scenario through the computer. Pirates wouldn't care about the cargo. They would attack any valuable target. Rebel groups would target military vessels, not random cargo ships. Enemy alien species would attack Krillian ships regardless of what they were carrying. Only one explanation made sense, and it terrified her. She gathered her data files and hurried to Admiral Krexmall's command center. The massive Krillian was studying battle reports when she burst through the door, her usual professional composure completely gone. "Admiral, I've found the pattern," she said, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. "The attacks aren't random. Every single missing ship was carrying something connected to humans, slaves, stolen goods, technology, or personnel involved in managing human territories." Krexmall's yellow eyes narrowed as he processed this information. "You're saying something is targeting us specifically because of our treatment of humans?" "Yes, sir. Whatever is hunting our ships knows exactly what each vessel is carrying. It's choosing its targets based on their connection to humanity." She paused, struggling to voice her most frightening conclusion. "Admiral, I think we're dealing with human technology, some kind of advanced artificial intelligence maybe. But that should be impossible. We destroyed their entire fleet at Kepler, stationed decades ago." The Admiral's blood ran cold as memories of the war flooded back. He remembered the final battle, the desperate human resistance, and the massive battleship that had fought to the very end. "Find it," he growled, his voice filled with deadly determination. "Find it before it finds us." The 5 Krillian ships moved through the Nexus corridor like a slow-moving parade, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. At the center of the convoy, 2 massive prison transports carried their human cargo, 300 men, women, and children packed into cramped holding cells like livestock heading to market. The remaining 3 vessels were heavily armed escorts, their weapon systems powered up and ready for trouble. Admiral Krexmall crouched in the command chair of his flagship Dominance, hidden deep within the swirling gases of the Helix Nebula, just a few light minutes away. Around him, 23 of the Empire's finest warships waited in perfect silence, their crews tense with anticipation. This was the largest trap the Krillian military had ever set, and everyone knew their mysterious enemy would have to take the bait. "Convoy is approaching the ambush zone," reported his tactical officer. "All ships report ready status." Krexmall's scarred face twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. After months of watching his ships disappear one by one, he finally had a chance to face this ghost that had been haunting the shipping lanes. "This time we're ready for you," he muttered under his breath. The plan was simple but effective. The convoy would continue on its scheduled route to the Vortex, slave markets acting like easy prey. When the phantom attacker appeared, Krexmall's battle group would emerge from the nebula and surround it. No matter how advanced this mysterious enemy might be, it couldn't possibly fight off 24 Krillian warships at once. Inside the prison transports, the human captives huddled together in their dark cells, unaware that they were being used as bait. Most were civilians who had been captured during recent raids on hidden human settlements. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, and shopkeepers who had committed no crime other than being born human in a galaxy controlled by aliens. A young human woman named Min pressed her face against the narrow viewport of her cell, watching the stars slide by. She had been a teacher on the agricultural colony of Haven, before the Krillians found their hidden settlement. Now she was destined for the slave markets, where she would be sold to work in alien mines or factories until she died. "Something's happening," whispered an older man named Jun from the cell next to hers. The guards seemed nervous. He was right. The Krillian guards had been unusually tense for the past hour, constantly checking their weapons and communication devices. Some of them kept glancing at the escort ships flying alongside the convoy, as if expecting trouble at any moment. Suddenly, space itself seemed to tear open in front of the convoy. The Indomitable dropped out of hyperspace, exactly where Intelligence Officer Yixhara had predicted it would appear, its dark hull materializing from the void like a nightmare made real. The ancient human battleship was even larger than the reports had suggested, its weapons already charging for battle. But Commander Lee didn't attack immediately. Instead, his voice crackled across all communication frequencies in perfect, unaccented human language. "Human prisoners, cover your eyes immediately, close them tight, and keep them closed until I tell you it's safe." Min and the other captives looked at each other in confusion and hope. Was this a rescue? After all these months of captivity, had someone finally come to save them? Before anyone could react, the Indomitable unleashed a massive electromagnetic pulse that swept across the convoy like an invisible wave. The Krillian escort ships immediately went dark, their systems overloaded and their crews blinded by the surge of energy. But the prison transports, protected by their older, simpler electronics, remained functional. In the chaos that followed, Lee's ship moved with impossible grace and speed, its weapons precisely targeting the disabled escorts, while its tractor beams locked onto the prison ships. Admiral Krexmol watched in horror as his trap became a rescue mission. The Mordak system had never seen anything like it. 200 Krillian warships filled the space around the system's dead planets like a metallic constellation, their hulls gleaming under the harsh light of twin red suns. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels stretched across millions of kilometers in perfect military formation. This was the third battle fleet in its full glory, the same force that had conquered 17 star systems and crushed a dozen alien civilizations. Admiral Zekriel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Empire's Wrath, watching his fleet prepare for battle. The ship was nearly 2 kilometers long, armed with enough firepower to destroy entire planets. Its crew of 3,000 represented the finest warriors the Krillian Empire had to offer. Around him, dozens of similar vessels waited in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. "Final fleet status report," Zekriel commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge. "All ships report battle ready, Admiral," his tactical officer replied. "We have 53 heavy battleships, 91 cruisers, 42 destroyers, and 14 support vessels. Every gun in the fleet is aimed at the hyperspace entry point." Zekriel nodded with satisfaction. He had studied every report about this mysterious ghost ship that had been terrorizing their shipping lanes. According to intelligence estimates, they were dealing with a single human battleship from the old war, probably damaged and running on outdated technology. The idea that one ancient vessel could threaten the might of the entire Krillian Empire was almost insulting. "This ends today," he declared to his bridge crew. "One primitive human ship against the greatest military force our empire has ever assembled. When we're finished, there won't be enough pieces left to identify." The bridge crew rumbled their agreement. Many of them were veterans of the human war, and they remembered how easily the Empire had crushed the human resistance. Humanity had been brave but foolish, fighting with inferior technology and desperate tactics. This ghost ship was probably just the last gasp of a dead civilization. But when the Indomitable finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, even the most experienced Krillian officers fell silent with shock. The ship that appeared before them was no longer the same vessel that had drifted dead in the asteroid field months ago. The ancient human battleship had transformed itself into something entirely new and terrifying. Its original hull was still there, but now it was covered with gleaming Krillian armor plating stolen from destroyed ships, alien shield generators. hummed with power along its flanks, while modified weapon turrets bristled from every surface. The Indomitable had become a hybrid creature, part human engineering, part alien technology, and completely deadly. Commander Lee had spent months upgrading himself with the best systems he could salvage from his victims. Krillian shields now protected human armor. Alien weapons drew power from human reactors. Advanced targeting computers guided missiles designed by human engineers decades ago. "Impossible," whispered Zekriel's tactical officer. "How did it get so big? So heavily armed?" Before anyone could answer, Commander Lee's voice crackled across every communication channel in the fleet. His words were calm and cold, carrying the weight of 23 years of patient rage. "I am Commander Lee of the human battleship Indomitable. You destroyed my crew. You enslaved my people. You turned our worlds into graveyards and our children into property." His voice grew harder with each word. "You took everything from us. Now let me show you what humanity learns from loss." The Indomitable's weapons powered up with a sound like thunder, and Admiral Zekriel realized with growing horror that his trap might have become something else entirely, a reckoning. The battle began at 800 hours and would be remembered as the longest single-ship engagement in galactic history. Commander Lee's tactics were unlike anything the Krillians had ever encountered. The Indomitable didn't charge straight into the enemy formation like a typical warship. Instead, it moved like a hunting predator, using the system's asteroid fields and gas clouds as cover. Admiral Zekriel watched in growing horror as his perfectly organized battle fleet fell into chaos. The human battleship would suddenly appear behind a group of cruisers, unleash devastating firepower for exactly 30 seconds, then vanish into hyperspace before his ships could even turn to face it. Minutes later, it would materialize on the opposite side of the fleet, striking a completely different target. "It's impossible," shouted his tactical officer. "No ship can make that many hyperspace jumps so quickly. The engines should overheat." But Lee had learned from every Krillian vessel he had captured over the past months. He had integrated their advanced navigation systems with human engineering, creating something that neither species had imagined possible. The Indomitable could now make precision micro-jumps that lasted only seconds, allowing it to appear anywhere in the battle zone without warning. The Krillian fleet tried to adapt, spreading their ships out to prevent concentrated attacks. Lee responded by focusing on their command vessels, targeting the ships that coordinated fleet movements. When they bunched together for mutual defense, he used long-range bombardment to pick off stragglers. When they spread out again, he would dart in close for devastating hit-and-run attacks. Hour after hour, the ancient human battleship carved through the pride of the Krillian Empire. The eternal glory exploded when Lee's modified plasma cannons overloaded its shield generators. The cruiser Iron Dominance was torn apart by a spread of human torpedoes loaded with Krillian warheads. The destroyer Swift Death lived up to its name when the Indomitable rammed it at half-light speed, emerging from the collision barely scratched. As the battle raged on, Commander Lee did something that would change the course of galactic history. He began broadcasting the entire engagement across every communication frequency he could access. The signal reached human slave colonies, hidden rebel bases, and even the ruins of Earth itself. For the first time in over 20 years, humans across the galaxy watched one of their own fighting back against their oppressors. On the mining world of Kepler-7, human slaves stopped their work to listen to the battle reports crackling over stolen radios. In the factories of Vortax Prime, workers whispered about the ghost ship that was destroying the Krillian fleet. Children born in captivity heard stories about the Indomitable and learned that humanity had once built ships that could challenge the stars themselves. Admiral Zekriel made his final stand aboard the Empire's Wrath, surrounded by the burning wreckage of his once mighty fleet. Less than 30 ships remained operational, and most of those were damaged and fleeing toward the system's edge. His flagship's shields were failing, his weapon systems were overloaded, and his crew was beginning to panic. The Indomitable appeared, one last time, materializing directly in front of the dreadnought with all weapons aimed at the bridge. Lee's voice crackled over the communication system, heard not just by the dying Krillian crew, but by countless listeners across the galaxy. "This is for Captain Han, who believed in justice. This is for Navigator Kim, who dreamed of home. This is for Engineer Park, who died protecting others. This is for every human life you stole, every world you burned, every child you enslaved. His voice grew cold as space itself. This is for humanity. The Empire's wrath exploded in a flash of light that could be seen from 3 star systems away. As the debris field settled, something extraordinary began happening across the galaxy. Ancient human ships that had been drifting dead in space for decades suddenly stirred to life. Derelict vessels hidden in asteroid fields powered up their reactors. AI systems that had been dormant since the end of the war began responding to Lee's broadcast signal. The Indomitable was no longer alone.